knowledge is a deeply isolating thing. Knowledge can be seen as an existential curse you condemned to experience. Because there's way too much shit you wish you didn't know. Ignorance is bliss, they say after all. Defining knowledge as a state or fact of knowing is the first thing that comes up if you look for a definition of knowledge. But it's a recursive definition. The state or fact of knowing. You know you're listening to my voice right now. And that's because it's immediate. There's nothing that can make you doubt that. You just know. And this reveals that the nature of knowledge is something very much experiential, very much immediate. Therefore, more so than this definition, I define knowledge as the awareness of a state of experience. All you know and ever will know relates to your own experience. You are the only person in this entire universe who knows what it's like to be you. And your knowledge of this is not an idea. It's not abstract or conceptual. It's a constant experience. And the way to learn more about you is to ask you about yourself, to narrate your autobiography to me and tell me little anecdotes of your life. And I'd come a tiny bit closer to getting to know you. I would use my own life experiences, my own knowledge, and then contrast it with your life, and then match them with the words you say, making some meaning and connect through that. But ultimately, the reality is that you're alone in your own experience, and the bridge between my life and your life can never be crossed. I can't know what it's like to be you from here. And the knowledge of your own experience, on the most foundational level, is what makes you existentially alone. That's how knowledge becomes a burden. Knowing becomes an experience of isolation. Everyone carries around with them stuff they wish they didn't know. For some, it's a nihilistic burden to have seen the empty nature of reality, which has sunken them into a deep hole of meaninglessness. Or there's a time for some where they realize that death is real and it has hit their lives. And then it's difficult to live your life as it was before. Or just looking around how much suffering there exists everywhere. There's a brutality to the human condition, or just life overall. And yet, it is somehow all real. And once it's known, it even becomes realer than before. Then it becomes part of your own life, of your own experience. And we humans try to suppress the sheer amount of suffering, the sheer amount of tragedy and stuff we would like to suppress. And that's what we do globally, right? We deny and we ignore and we suppress everything that is out there because it just feels too much to handle. And all of human history, all of society, all of culture, everything that has ever been invented, all of this knowledge is within you. You carry it in your unconscious mind all the time. And the moment I say a word like tree, you immediately know what it is because of the construction we have created. But some experiences are so dark and so heavy that you carry them alone in your mind because no word can even describe what it's like to be in this experience. And with this crushing cosmic weight, we have to ask ourselves, why do I have to experience this? Why do we suffer? What has any being in existence done to deserve this? So to reel back here for a moment, my name is Marco and I help people through existential suffering. And I use language to try to bridge the gap between the deeply profound and the physical, material reality that we are actually living in. And I know that as deep as, or the more profound an experience is, the less translatable it becomes through words. It's like trying to talk about a dream or a psychedelic trip. Words just always cheapen the thing. They're never the same. But words still provide themselves as extremely useful because they aren't meaningless. these words point to nodes in your own mind. The structure of how your identity functions, of how your entire knowledge base is categorized in different webs of words and associations in your mind. So words don't just carry the literal meaning of the thing, but whatever experience and association hides behind these words. Your own experience is the knowledge that is embedded in whatever I say. So depending on your experience, some of this will relate more to you and some will seem a bit odd. But what is common for everybody is that at some point, when they enter into this existential stuff, you enter a loop of existential pondering. And all you end up doing is you deconstruct your own mind through the words you use. And you deconstruct and you deconstruct, and suddenly you find yourself without ground under your feet, without a way to orient yourself in reality, because the words have lost their meaning or they've become a weird, confusing mess in the face of actual experience. So this process of deconstruction, I will be doing this in this video too, and at the end I'll give you some ground to stand on. So take this as a slight warning and preparation as we're going very deep. Once you see that knowledge is an experience instead of some external thing, then a lot of ideas start to open up. Suddenly, definitions start to collapse. Knowledge becomes synonymous with consciousness, awareness, understanding, and attention. Or you might even say intuition. All really describe a state of being, something that is immediately accessed through its immediacy. So your mind is like a supercomputer that contextualizes all of reality through these different associations and wordly connections. And it does so with your own experience. And then it creates a reality model of yourself and reality. But this means that when you say, I am conscious, you're doing something very weird here, because your reality is self-referencing itself about its own self-referentiality. So my last video was about how odd this entire loop is and how you kind of deconstruct and completely destroy reality from the inside when you do this completely. But this video is going to concentrate on the act of accessing knowledge itself. And you can even see that the consciousness is interacting with all physics. Because when you say something, it's not just some loose idea in your head, but you're actually vibrating airwaves into all of the space around you. Like you're literally touching the physics of reality. This means that whatever consciousness is and whatever reality is are deeply interconnected. They're intertwined. You cannot really separate them. The material reality and the physics of whatever consciousness is, they are always talking to each other. And through this, what you see outside is just known. It doesn't mean that there couldn't be some illusion happening in your own conscious experience. But even then, the illusion is known. You kind of need to account for the illusion, but the illusion is still known. So it doesn't matter whatever you've gone through in your life. All of it is real. The suffering, the joy, the love, the loss, everything happened. And you are the carrier of that knowledge. And there's no way around that. People try to deny it or suppress it. And in spiritual circles, it's very common to say it's all just subjective and it doesn't matter, or it's all just consciousness and therefore it's kind of an illusion. But all of this is very irrelevant in the face of real experience. Another way to say this is that your subjectivity is an objective state of existence. If you were to look at reality objectively, you need to take your experience into account. Or you're not talking about reality, you're talking about something else. So meaning is something that emerges in this interconnection between what we experience, our outside senses, the way we form words in our head, and this way we construct meaning in our lives. And this ability to construct diverse types of meaning is very, very vast. Like if you're somebody who has constructed like this reality where life is meaningless, which is kind of paradoxical if you really think about it. But if you have this sort of framework, well, then it really changes how you experience your life, because it's just the way you've structured your own operating system. And it's very important to be in tune with that, to understand that words are not just words, and they're actually influencing your own internal model of reality. So meaning is emergent from the bottom up, and therefore it is real and it matters. And this is why the suffering hurts, and it really sucks. And the darkness you see outside is also real. And from there, you come to a very natural question that asks, why? And why me? Why in this body? And why humanity? There's also this very interesting philosophical question that we're going to cover that asks, why is there something rather than nothing? Which is a question that personally haunted me for a very long time. Quite a few years back, I had a night out with a few friends of mine, and we had a few drinks, and there was this girl with which we were talking, and at this time I was an anti-natalist, so I had the position that having kids is immoral. So I thought it's actually immoral to have children because you would just leave them into, you would let them go into an evil world full of suffering and without their consent. So we were having this conversation about, children being like an evil thing to bring upon of the world. And at some point I said, think about all the suffering that exists in the universe and add it all together. Take all the pain, all the death, all the torture, and put it against the pleasure and the good things of life. From all the beings in this galaxy, there's no way that the pleasure is higher than the pain. I think if you had a button, I said this to the girl, I think if you had a button with which you could destroy the entire universe, the moral and empathetic action would be to push that button to give mercy to all existent beings. And then there was silence. She looked at me quite shocked and said, wow, yeah, you really are crazy. And this stuck with me because it very much exemplifies the mindset that I was in back at this time. And I think the main disconnect happens when you look at how awful the world can be and you have no positive counterbalance, and then just look at it with raw calculative logic. And at this time, my mind wasn't even depressed, but it revealed the relationship I had to existence, which was this feeling of burden with existence. This feeling that being aware and knowing all of the stuff that is going on is just making me miserable. Or it makes existence kind of inherently miserable. But when you know so much about existence, what you're doing is you're kind of curating the facts, and you're creating an entire worldview that just sees what it sees. And it's not that what you see isn't true, like the knowledge of it is correct, but the mind then creates a giant narrative of suffering. It then only sees the knowledge framework of suffering, and then it becomes hyper fixated on this part. And you kind of lack perspective because you are in this body and in this human mind that has now selected all of these horrible things about existence. And then it says to itself, there's no way you can change the equation of life to make it worth it. Like if there's so much suffering and there's a relatively little good things, then how are you supposed to mend this? And yeah, this is a very difficult question to solve because you are just limited in your own perspective for how much goodness is really out there. And you cannot really make this calculation like objectively. You're just completely biased for the negative aspects of life. So it leaves you kind of with this uncomfortable feeling that there's no way to solve this problem. And all you can do is start to overthink in your head to try to solve it. I don't think the same way anymore, as I've seen how limited this line of thinking actually is. But it does still leave you with this question of why is reality like this? Because it's not just that this button of universal annihilation doesn't exist, but whatever the universe is, whatever the universe does, or dare I say, is after, it doesn't really fit into our own human personal frameworks. If there's so much shit I have to go through, make it at least mean something. Make it not all be for nothing. And this visceral sense brings us to the question of existential knowledge. Like, why does anything exist? How can I kind of mend this existential situation in a way that it is satisfying, that I can make it into something that makes sense, and that we are looking for the answer to the nature of existence, or what really is truth. And I for myself have found the answer, but it is not something that I can communicate directly with you easily through words. Although believe me, I am trying in every single video of mine. I hope to get you closer. But it ends up being about your own experience and your own relationship to life. And there's an entire web constructed within your mind that needs to get untangled for you to find the answer yourself. And this is why I work with people directly. And I've developed a protocol now that I call Ego Architecture, that is a 90-minute audit where I map out how your identity is actually structured in the most objective way possible. It's there to find the clarity so that you don't dig yourself into a deeper hole. Because I know nothing is worse than doing existential work the wrong way for years. This is just how you get a lot of very crazy, spiritual, ungrounded people, or people that are just always dead inside. There's a PDF in the description that breaks down exactly how this process works. If it resonates, then it's there. Let's keep going. For me, the main question always was, why is there something rather than nothing? I was so obsessed over finding the answer to this question because I couldn't wrap my mind around it. Why isn't there just nothing? And then we could have stopped all of this existence from happening. Let's use everything we know so far to answer this question. Since we do exist, we need to ask ourselves, does it make sense to imagine non-existence? Has anybody ever witnessed a state of non-existence? If knowledge is an experience, non-existence would be the absence of knowledge. A space where there's nothing to know. Now, here it might get a bit trippy, but logically we can infer that such a state is impossible. Because for true, absolute nothingness to exist, this moment right now could not be happening. Because now something is already known. Something has already happened. You can't ever have absolute nothingness because you would have to make whatever is real unreal in the past. But it means it already is real. And that's why it can be made unreal. It's a paradox that answers itself through immediacy. Because even if there was some sort of nothingness, it would also just be a limited state that would end at some point, and then there would be something again. Which is kind of evident by the fact that there exists anything at all. Which leads to the very reasonable conclusion: there's ultimately no difference between nothingness and everything. The distinction collapses. They're the same thing from a different point of view. This philosophy has been coined by David Pearce as zero ontology. It suggests that the totality of reality may be undistinguishable from nothingness. You can imagine this in a few ways that make it less theoretical and more comprehensible. A good example of a way we can actually find nothing in the real world is in math. The number 0 would be the visual example of nothing. And everything is described in mathematics by the sign of infinity. So you can think about 0 as an example of nothing and infinity as an example of everything. Now, one way to think about it is that for 0 to exist, you automatically imply all possible numbers. Because if there's the number 0, well, then automatically numbers exist. They are implied, not really caused, not 0 came first and then came everything else, but you just have infinity, meaning 0 included. They are interdependent with each other. Even by formulating the idea of 0, you already have created the potential of all possible numbers, pointing to the idea that absolute nothingness can't exist. But in some relative sense, yeah, you can have 0 of something. From this perspective, existence is an endless movement from 0 towards infinity, which, when you look at the night sky or the seemingly endless forms of life on this planet, it feels intuitively right. The question that then comes is, why am I in this body and not in any other body? Why do I have to live this life and why cannot live this other life? And this question might seem reasonable from one angle, but if you introspect long enough, it doesn't really make much sense. It's like asking, why is the number 7 the number 7 and not the number 8? Or why are we born in the 21st century and not in the 1800s? The question doesn't really have a purpose because it can be asked from any vantage point. But every vantage point is the totality of what it is. It's just known as itself. So from the perspective of zero ontology, it's just all inevitable. Now, this might be grounding for those who are scientifically and mathematically minded, but it still can leave one with this underlying feeling of dread. Like, okay, so it's all just random and chaotic, and there's no reason or purpose behind it. Like we're looking for something beyond, but just find a chaotic arrangement of numbers. And in some way it feels true, but then there's also a lot of intelligence and beauty in however these numbers have ordered themselves in. But we should acknowledge that this desire to look for something beyond is also already an odd human bias. A cat doesn't concern itself with the purpose of her catness. And if you have somebody you love in your life, you also don't ask, well, what's the point of its existence? The love itself becomes the point, which is an interesting idea, isn't it? Like, love is the quality of wanting something to be rather than not to be, or wanting to be close to something rather than be apart from it. You might be getting onto something here. But before I go into the personal again, let me go even one layer more cosmic to, a very existential point of view. And it's a word that I so far have avoided, but it is time. And the idea is the idea of God. That's because for most people, this idea is associated in a very negative part of their mind. People hate the word in their cosmic web of connections. Like I touched on briefly before, we don't hear the literal meaning of a word, especially not about something we don't think exists. God, for most people, is synonymous with control and judgment, a fairy tale or myth, anti-intellectualism, or institutional religions. Also, some people see it as evidence for delusion or some vague cosmic authority figure. Basically like an external authoritarian that is irrational and belonging to an old worldview that most smart people have consciously rejected. But taking this framework I've constructed, let's ask ourselves the question, what would God be like if he actually existed, like in the classical sense? So God would be a being that knows everything as it is omniscient, is everywhere as it is omnipresent, and is unconditionally loving. If you accept that consciousness is knowing, and that this knowing is basically interconnected with all physics, just by the fact of studying physics or experiencing physics and seeing how it works, and the fact that we are intimately interconnected with it, then you already have two of the three components. Now, the all-loving part, well, that's a no-go for most people, right? Because how could you love all of existence? Like, what about torture? It's just unlovable. What about pain? And all of these different unpleasantness of life, even tiny things. We intuitively reject so much of the world because we see it as evil and then attribute it as some unacceptable thing. But if you let go of this notion of your own personal preference and look at the raw facts that consciousness allows all of experience to happen, then it leads to the question, is this what unconditional love means? To accept all possibilities of infinity without picking favorites, without saying, no, this is unacceptable, this should not exist, without wishing to seize all of the universe with a push of a button because some things are too bad to be accepted. But loving all of it so much that you want to be it, by being close to it and wanting to know what it's like. Because how would God know what it is like to be a cat if it isn't literally experiencing being a cat? More so, how could God be infinite potential if it isn't literally all possible cats? Why would an unconditional loving being pick one thing over another? It literally must forget itself as infinity and become a finite self so that it can know what it's like to be a self-defined number, to be 27. You actually need to be 27. That's the only way God could actually know it all and be everywhere without having any sort of preference, being without any condition. In this way, existence fulfills the three criteria once you make the step and see consciousness as fundamental. At the end, I do not care about the label you put at it, really. I don't consider myself a theist still, but no matter if you want to call it God or existence or the universe or the timeless self, it's real. And from where we are, ignorance doesn't seem to be an option. But what is even more trippy is that even at this state of like normal human life, zero isn't that foreign to you. There are intense meditation experiences called cessations, where you literally blink out of existence. And people would describe it as, a zero state of experience where there's no knowledge, but there's still some sort of awareness happening, even of nothingness. And below just these extremely intense or high esoteric experiences, there's also this zero state of self that is present with you right now. You're looking through it, but can't really touch it. You are it, but you're also none of it. When you look into your experience, you can sense being zero all the time. There's this nothingness that shines through everything that happens. And there's a quiet peace there that you can access. All you must do is deconstruct all your sense of self until nothing remains. All the knowing you have long pushed into the background and didn't want to look, that is now causing all of these node structures in your mind. Once you clean yourself from them and you look at them honestly and you understand yourself with unconditional acceptance, you can mend what seemed to be separate. You will find yourself not just as a single number, not alone in a sea of infinite possibilities, but intimately interconnected with all things. What I can say is that I know how it feels to be swimming in this chaos of overwhelming knowledge. I know that once you see the architecture of reality, it can feel like the floor has dropped out from under you. And it can be a beautiful view, but it's also a very heavy weight to carry alone. You don't have to carry it alone. Everything I mentioned, the ego architecture, information PDF, and also my private community can be found in the description below if you want it. I made a video about the self-referential loop I mentioned earlier, that thing that makes all of this possible really. And you can watch this video next.